see what we can do to help this old bass. This is a Fender Precision bass from the year 1960. As you can see, it's pretty clean, only some slight traces of use. Yes, the P bass, as the hipster kids call it. It was Fender's first electric bass guitar, brought to the market in 1950. In its original form, it shares a lot of characteristics with its contemporary, the Telecaster. They were designed within a couple of years of each other. And in other ways, some features would later be used when designing the Strat, like the double cutaway. This is pretty innovative. And yes, there were a couple of earlier attempts to bring a bass guitar to market. We have to acknowledge Paul Tutmark's Audio Vox bass fiddle from the mid-30s. That's the one that the know-it-alls will cite when the trivia gets hot and heavy. There are a couple of others. I think Rickenbacker made one. I think also Regal had a bizarre, gigantic guitar bass. None of them really went anywhere. This is the one, right? In some ways, it's one of Leo Fender's most revolutionary designs, in that it was so quickly adopted, and it basically replaced the upright acoustic bass in popular music, with the exception of classical ensembles and jazz. You know, it's so much easier to carry around. 1960 is a pretty good year for these things, I think. The rosewood fretboard, this is a slab board, became standard the year previous in 1959. But this was the very first year for a celluloid tortoise pickguard. This is an early example, and it's in reasonable shape, actually. A lot of them have shrunk in ways that cause serious damage. They'll deform, and the constant pulling at the screws will make them crack or become seriously wavy. But this one is really holding its own. The split coil pickup became standard in 1957. Previous to that, it was more like a Telecaster pickup. It's nice in that it gives you a hum canceling effect. They had to be careful not to publicize it as such, though, because Gibson's patent for the humbucker was very recent, or it was still in the certification process, right? So, intellectual property. So the P-Bass is a pretty big object, as these things go. And being the first, it has what would become the standard long scale for bass guitars. 34 inches, that's pretty long, you know. For a guitar, I don't know if you would want to go very much longer. I think some people have tried. But it's kind of a holdover from the upright bass, which the scale length on those is usually 41, 42 inches, thereabouts. But very different ergonomics, right? So, you know, it's long. Who played them? Everyone. It's probably quicker to note the players who use something else, right? But it does the job really, really well. So much of this design is just iconic. This one has a neck issue. I think it's been an issue for some time, mainly because it has this access hole up here on the headstock end, which, although common in some other models in different eras, is completely out of place in Fender guitars from 1960. Looking down there past the spider webs, I can see the end of the anchor for the truss rod. Perhaps the rod broke and had to be removed or pushed out of the channel. It's not really an easy process removing the rods in these, because the channels are curved. They, you know, shift towards the back of the neck in its middle. It's not a straight line. Occasionally people will say, well, if the truss rod's broken, why don't you just take the fretboard off and put a new one in? In this era, with the slab board, Fender stopped using the skunk stripe on the back of the neck, which was previously how they were installed. But if you look at the end of this board here, you'll note that it's a curve. It's slightly, the neck itself is slightly concave, and the underside of the fretboard is slightly convex. They mate together. It's not flat. And yes, you can pull the boards off, but more often than not, it ends up damaging one or both of these things because it's not a straight line that you're putting a knife into. So it can get really messy really fast. And yes, of course, someone in the comment section will observe that Leo Fender intended these necks to be replaceable. No one wants to replace the neck on a 1960 Fender. So apparently the rod does not work, and we're left with about 25 thousandths worth of relief, which is too much. Despite that, the player manages with it. I run into a lot of basses who don't mind high action for some reason. Now we'd like to see if we can improve that action, which is 8/64ths on the bass side, 7 on the treble. Anything we can do to bring that down would be helpful with so much relief in the neck. This job falls into the setup category. I'm not going to perform major surgery. We're going to make it function as well as possible the way it is. It will likely involve a neck pocket shim. We'll see what happens with the truss rod too. Maybe that can be helped. The saddles are pretty low, especially on the treble side. That's basically lying right on the plate. The surface of the truss rod nut is really deep in there. It's got to be 3/8 of an inch, which is usually a terrible sign. It means either the rod has broken, the threaded portions, or perhaps the wood at the anchor point has crushed through repeated attempts to tighten and straighten the neck, the point where it gave up all of its structural integrity and it becomes super mushy. And, well, it's not good. Put it that way. Loosen off the neck screws. With those loose, I can tilt the neck back enough to gain access and see if we can... I'm not going to try and tighten it to start off with. I'm willing to bet that's a fairly new nut. I played patty cake with it and found these 4 washers. I'm not sure we've run out of thread. I think it's probably a case of just no bearing surface. I'm going to see if I can heat press some of this out so we're not starting with 40 thousandths relief without any tension on. Got it set up to ride the lightning here. While that sits in the firm but nurturing embrace of the bender, let's have a look at this Les Paul Deluxe. This is from the 70s, a Norlin era product. It was long ago converted from the Deluxe configuration with mini buckers to full size, so I guess it's now a standard. But it's got a gold top too, currently. Previously, it had a rather terrible sunburst effect, which had gone over what was originally a gold top, I believe. Anyway, it's obviously had quite a lot of history. This is definitely a player's grade guitar, as it's played by a player. Had a few other changes, had a new bridge because the previous one collapsed, etc. However, it shows vestiges of its beginning, i.e. the stacked lamination known as the pancake body. Rather than a mahogany neck, this has a stack lamination of maple. Nicely quarter-sawn, though. And, of course, the volute. Stylish. Functional. Frets on these guitars started off low and wide, and these have been lowered even more, to the point where there's basically nothing left. For those who get annoyed with me when I say that occasionally Gibson used a decal, and they assume that it was always a silkscreen, this is very definitely a water slide decal. These frets are currently about 27 thousandths of an inch tall, with divots that are much deeper, and you can see in some places the string windings on the bass strings have actually been ground into the frets to the point where they've left striations. I've always liked the archaic term ichor. It sets your teeth on edge, right? What is this? Is this just resin from the wood? I'd like to think so too, but it's probably biological in nature. These frets came out really nice. They were just the perfect size for their slot. That's not always the case. Some of these Deluxes did not have nibs, including this one. And it's important to try and keep these little landings here because they provide support under the ends of the frets. I'll clean these guys out with my thin, scratchy tool here, which is 22 thousandths of an inch thick or wide.
Enjoy the seldom seen feat of my camera tripod while I clip these things to length. I clip the ends of the tang, and they have to be filed smooth. Otherwise, you'll see a little bump in the center of the fret when you're done, and it's not good. Doesn't look right. It has to be smooth. Like that. I knocked them in as usual, dressed them down, and gave them the polishing treatment. They gleam.
These mid-70s Deluxes often get pegged for being like high-end Japanese clones or copies or fakes, lawsuit guitars, because there's stuff about them that's really unexpected if you don't know. The maple neck? No, that's wrong. It has no fret nibs. It's got this tiny little sticker on the back of the headstock with the serial number. What's that about? Unlike anything they did before or since. It's not stamped into the wood. It says made in the USA, but it's a decal. And the number is weird. If you put it into one of the serial number lookups, oftentimes it just comes back void. But it is correct. They only did this for 3 years, 75 through 1977. This one has a prefix of 99 before the serial number. That means it was made in 1975. If it said 00, that would be 76. How about 77? What would you expect? No, it's 06. That's ridiculous. Who authorized that? It's outrageous. Right to jail. Right away. So I'm going to tighten this up while it's still in the clamp. Give me some mechanical advantage so that the nut doesn't have to do all the work. It's held straight. Well, this is very frustrating. It really doesn't work. How to describe? It's like if you have one of those inexpensive plastic bottles, like a soda bottle or water bottle. Sometimes if you keep turning the cap, you'll get some resistance, and then it'll pop over back into the starting thread, and it'll be loose again. It's not that the rod is spinning freely in there. I think it has to do with the threads. I have to check something. I think there's something about thread pitch on the older rods. Memory is being triggered. Is this maybe the wrong nut? Because it looks so much newer. Could it be the wrong pitch? Yes. Sources conflict, of course, and do not trust the AI-generated answer if you ask the question. But in the 50s, Fender was using a number 1024 thread. Happened to have a 1024 screw. That will not fit, except for one thread, into this nut, which I believe is probably the modern standard, which started in 1964, which is 1032. Apparently also, for a short time, they also used an 832 rod in 61, 62. And no, that's not, there's no way. This is much too small. So, could this be a 1024 rod from 1960? Maybe. This is not going to do. What is it though? Is it possible the threads have been mangled so much by someone trying to put a 1032 onto a 1024? That could be, because the resistance is almost immediate. I mean, you can sort of get it started, but you would seriously damage something.
So why don't I just buy a replacement 1024 nut? Easier said than done. You can go through all of the usual economical choices, all the places you would suspect, Reverb, eBay, Amazon. You're not going to find one. A lot of them are resellers, and much of the information on there is incorrect in many cases, but no 1024s. Doesn't StewMac make a tool for this? To just rechase the threads? Yes, yeah. How many times am I going to use a number 1024 truss rod rescue kit? Am I going to amortize this over one customer or two? No. StewMac is the only place I can find that sells a 1024 nut. And the $47.03 is one thing, but you've got to tack on the customs broker fee as well as, whatever tariffs might or might not be in place this week. So I don't even know if this is going to work. Seems like a big outlay. It might be better for me just to try and, make my own, buy a piece of 3/8 inch steel and, tap it for 1024 and see what happens. I might do that.
Well, I had me an idea. I want to look at the threads. And I also thought to myself, if this is where the nut started off, and this is where it ended up, if we're dealing with threads that have been crushed or damaged, there's no way it could push in that far. Just isn't that much leverage available. Something else is going on. So I drilled a hole, and with that I was able to push the couple extra washers out of the way. Got those out finally. And wonder of wonders. I don't know if we'll be able to see this, but we'll try. You can see that there is the small block which the end of the rod is supposed to rest against is very definitely loose in there. I would think that this was supposed to be backed up by solid wood. However, in some designs, the Biflex rod, which is a more modern invention, Fender definitely has space behind this. The other thing I can tell, which is a bit of a surprise, is this is not a 1024 thread. It's finer than that. And once I got those extra washers out of the way, this thing is functioning fine. This is definitely the correct nut. This is a real mystery because this is a slab board and it has a 1032 thread in it. The other possibility, of course, is that this is not the original truss rod. Could have been replaced with the more modern thread. On this side, of course, we got the access channel, which could have been used to bore out and basically unrivet the original stop block on this side, at which point the whole rod could be pushed out and a new one put in its place. Why they would have bored this area down so far with a 3/8 inch drill bit, I don't know. Was this spacer just sort of sitting there? Like, I would hope that someone who would go to all of this trouble would understand at least the basics of the Fender truss rod system. This has to bear against something. You can push and push and, I don't know, run out of thread maybe? Or is this threaded rod that's threaded all the way along? Which would make sense. I don't know how long the original threads would have been on these truss rods. So again, I think the best thing to do is put this thing back in there, and I'm going to epoxy it in place. I can't get enough light down there to show you, it's too far away, but there is another piece of metal down at the bottom, and it actually, if I had to guess, it might be a standard hex nut. I don't know. It shouldn't be there. It's at a depth that there's no way. So maybe they were counting on it to sort of jam. Regardless, I'm going to try and epoxy it in place. Use some shrink tubing here to protect the threads. And we'll find the smoother surface. That one. Should clean that with alcohol. Also roughen the surface. Give the epoxy a place to key into. So I'll get some on the metal spacer. I'll push that into where I want it to be. This nut is going to be farther in. It's going to still look sunken because I think the ends of this rod are mashed. I'm basically going to fill up the cavity behind it. Okay, tune in for the exciting conclusion next week. So these 70s Les Pauls are sometimes a bit maligned. And of course this one's been tampered with extensively, ruining its value on the collector's market forever. But there are people who genuinely love them. I had this on the bench yesterday, stopped for a second, I'm looking at Instagram, and my compatriot in the business, Nick, at Nickified Guitars, has exactly the same guitar on his bench. Exactly. And I was like, twinsies! And he says, oh man, I love this thing. You would not believe this. I've always wanted a 75 Deluxe. It's my holy grail. It's the one. So it's his Desert Island guitar. And I know that Nick has a number of Les Pauls. So, you know, there's something to these. This thing now feels different to play with taller, more rounded frets. I didn't leave them full height either. I dressed them back, not as low as they came from the factory, but the player wanted something a bit taller than he had, and maybe not full height as they came from the box. They're about 38 thousandths tall, which is, you know, a good solid number. I think they feel nice, and yeah, I like them.